Alexandria, a city that set out to capture the world's knowledge the way its namesake captured the world. The young Macedonian conqueror never lived to see its completion, but Ptolemy saw his vision through. Its great library became a hub for knowledge in the Roman Empire, until Julius Caesar sacked the city and set fire to the ships in the harbor, a fire which may have burned large portions of the library. Was the knowledge contained within lost forever, or did it ultimately meet some other fate? All right, welcome to Wisdom of the Immortals. I'm Peter. I'm here with Ryan.
How's it going, Peter?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
Doing great, thanks. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Library of Alexandria, which is something I think a lot of people are aware of the existence of, but maybe don't have all the information about. And there's also a lot of just mystery and intrigue surrounding the whole scenario. So it's something that I find very interesting, and I think a lot of people also will that might listen to this. There was a vast store of knowledge there at one point in time, as well as it being a cultural and educational hub for much of the Greco-Roman world. And it's something that seems to have just kind of gone up in smoke at some point in time. And I'd like to kind of delve into that and see what we can discern from what we do have information-wise about not only that library, but about the time period and about what may have come from all of these events. The Library of Alexandria, as the name implies, was founded originally by Alexander the Great, the Macedonian conqueror, who united much of the Greek world, which went on to, of course, become the Greco-Roman world, the area surrounding the Mediterranean, and his conquest, of course, stretched all the way as far as the borders of India before he eventually wound up dying at the early age of 32 in Babylon. But despite not completing the library in his lifetime, a man named Claudius Ptolemy, did complete the Library of Alexandria, and it went on to become this just marvel of that time, and really this marvel of antiquity in general, where people came from all over the known world at that time to come and to not only see literature that was there, but to study, to discuss ideas, and it was just this very important place, right? And
It was essentially the first university, not so much a library,
absolutely,
but a
absolutely, no,
center.
it was, and it was a much more freeform institution than what you would find in today's universities, for the most part, I would think. And I think there was a lot. You had a lot of cultural exchange of ideas between different cultures going on that led to a lot of important research and innovations. And the it's hard really to even picture from a modernistic viewpoint the types of things that went on in that, because you would have had likely fairly novel, albeit maybe on a small scale, but fairly novel discoveries on probably a regular basis there, with the different meetings of the minds that took place in a location like that. And it's very fascinating to ponder what all went on there. We don't have any record of the extent of the literature that existed there even. And it really leaves one to wonder what all was there at that time. and what all went on there. We do know some things about it, but it's just a lot of it is still it's still a mystery. We don't know. And the library was, of course, eventually destroyed, and we don't have a great physical idea of what the library would have even looked like. But we do have there are some speculative illustrations and things like that that exist, and I'd venture to guess there's probably some documents that detail it in various aspects and whatnot too. But the Library of Alexandria was for those of you who don't know, was the largest collection in the world of documents, books, parchments, things like that. There were said to be somewhere, I believe,
900,000 was the estimate that
yeah. I've seen various estimates in my research about it, but that certainly fits within the spectrum of what I've seen as well. I came to somewhere between like 500,000, 750,000. But truth be told, it could actually be a much larger number than that, or it could be a somewhat smaller number than that, and we really have no way to know. But point being, the amount was astronomical for that time, and this was like a super university. This is not, when we think about a university now, even if we look at an Ivy League school, or you go to a college or a university in another country where the Ivy League is not the gold standard for what it is or isn't, and we could compare it to Oxford or Cambridge or something like that. But these schools they pale in comparison to the magnitude of what this was. It would be like if you took all of the Ivy League schools and put them together and they were one school, but on a grander scale. And without the structure of that as well, right? Because you had no formal curriculum necessarily. Now, not to say that there wouldn't have been, because there probably would have been. I would think there would have been various teachers that would have showed up there, or just various academic types that would have showed up there, because a
yeah,
lot of a lot of people there were
well respected
polymaths.
minds.
Absolutely, a lot of people there were polymaths. They were not only learned in one subject but in many.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were doing, independent research, writing their own books.
Yes, and not only that, but likely becoming friends with other people who are doing the same thing and exchanging ideas in the process. When they take a break from writing, they're probably dining with these people, or sitting out by the banks of the Nile with these people. There it's just it's a very romantic concept, honestly, to think about. The
Absolutely.
you have you have people from all areas surrounding the Mediterranean. So you have people from what's modern day Europe now. You have people from what was Persia back then. You have people from Africa, and these people are all part of See, this is all empire at that time, so it's all one land at that time to them. But these are different peoples that came together with different cultural backgrounds and different perspectives on things, and it was an unprecedented meeting of the minds. And so you got a lot to really, even Ptolemy. I mean, he was learned in multiple subjects, and this is the man who took it upon himself to see that the library got completed upon Alexander's demise. Ptolemy himself was a mathematician, astronomer, geographer, and astrologer. And not only that, but he was the man responsible for finishing Alexander's work with the library. And this library was representative of Alexander's vision of the world, that nothing was really too great. And he wanted this to be representative of not only not only something as a monument, but he wanted it to be as grand as his ambitions for conquest were. He wanted to unite. He wanted to unite knowledge in the way he united empire. And that's something that's also very fascinating. Is just that someone who is a conqueror can also, and at such a young age. I mean, I'll be 37 years old this year, and to imagine someone who didn't even survive past 32 to have accomplished this, not only accomplished the beginnings of it, but to have inspired someone else so greatly that they would finish this for him. It's staggering, really.
Yeah, well, a vision like that, I mean, it seems worth bringing into fruition.
Oh, of course. It's
You know,
just
what he had in mind was a pretty big deal for that time. I mean, no one really probably had that idea before he did, or it would have been done.
especially not in that area, certainly.
It was a good spot for it. It was, like you said, the center of an empire, essentially.
It was the center of the world.
Center of
Not
yeah,
geographically, but politically it was.
absolutely.
And I mean, of course, there was the Far East as opposed to Near East, with Persia and whatnot being in what we would call the Near East of that period. But in the Far East, of course, there were different academic things going on and whatnot. But just this was the area of that time as far as civilization from what we consider in a modern perspective goes, right? And
Oh yeah, definitely.
it's phenomenal to think about what all could have occurred in that setting. It really is.
Um, Euclid, actually, we still learn Euclidean geometry at a
Hmm.
very early age in school. All of that was codified at the Library of Alexandria. Just goes to show how important that place was, even now with the founding of the modern era and with advancements in culture, technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and aside from the things we mentioned, I don't think I even mentioned that. Even Ptolemy was involved with influential work about music. He wrote about harmonics and music theory and things. He delved into optics. He had important work into the history of optics and dealing with light and reflection and things like that. And this was a place where if you had the wherewithal and the ability to get to this place, and you were a seeker of knowledge and you were somebody who wanted to further that, you would probably not only find exactly what you're looking for, but you would find things that you didn't know you wanted to find even, but would be beneficial to you, and branch out into different studies. And that's how these people became polymaths that were there, because a large number of the people I have studied, specific individuals from the Library of Alexandria's past, they were polymaths. They were gifted in multiple areas, not just interested in them. They were involved in writing treatises on all of these different disciplines, many of which were related, granted, many of which were in the sciences and things like that. But of course, when you get into cultural advances, things like that, that's huge when you have just that big of a blend of that kind of thing. It really is.
Yeah, as you said before, a meeting of the minds, a place where true geniuses would go. I mean, not everybody is attracted to learning in that way. So the people who were attracted there must have been pretty brilliant.
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, it's I wouldn't even know anything to compare it to in modern day, honestly. But it's you know I guess probably the closest things to compare it to would be not in modern day, would be to go back, is that Alexander was a student of Aristotle, right?
Yes.
And so you had a similar scenario, which I'm sure was inspiration behind it. Is it he wanted to take that model of how the Greek philosophers taught, and it was done largely out in the public, right? It was done, just kind of like out in the open. People were just passing by, and there was lectures going on,
Yeah, yeah,
and
definitely. I
he
wish we
took
had
that he
that.
took that and elevated it on a grander scale.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, I wish I could, sit in on a lecture on my way to the store, but now we have the internet, and I actually can do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have things. We have podcasts for that now, right? I mean, it's a phenomenal invention, honestly. This is we're almost in a cyclical recurrence of something similar. It's not the same. It will never be the same, but there are strangely similar aspects of it, really.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, some would say that in that period it was, some sort of renaissance.
Yes,
Same could be said
absolutely.
about today. Same could be said about today.
I think so. I mean, I think such is the cyclical nature of time that we have these great periods of breakthrough,
Hmm.
and they wax and wane, right? Because things happen, and whether you have a cataclysm or war or plague or whatever may affect the peoples of whatever region these things are going on in, that that you have rise and fall of empire, and that's a consistent theme throughout history. But with that, you have the gain and loss of knowledge and the rebuilding of that over and over, and there's this constant improving upon that because in the ancient times we can look back. There were steam engines, there were flamethrowers, there were computers, there were batteries, and these are all things that we have today, but they're in different incarnations. And this is not speculation. This is not theory. This is things we have proof of, right?
Yep. Just
And
not
I mean,
enough.
not enough, but I mean enough to where I've seen pictures of them. I've seen
Hmm.
illustrations. I'm content. I'm content to believe they at least were tested in some regard. And some things far past that, because there are things like, speaking about batteries, like the Baghdad battery is something that has absolutely been tested and has been proven to have been something that could have worked.
Yeah,
So,
that one, in my opinion, is just confounding.
isn't
What?
it though? It really is. There's I think honestly the reason that it's confounding is because we and I think not just we, but I think every generation or every civilization feels that they're on the cutting edge of things because they've worked so hard for it, and they've seen so many advances in their civilization give give way to new inventions and new ways of thinking about things, and treatises on things. And of course you have to be at the pinnacle of the existence of mankind at every generation, but that's not the way things necessarily are.
No, that's not always the case.
There are things in ancient history that we can't replicate today, and those are across multiple subjects and across multiple cultures and across multiple time periods. There are feats of architecture, metallurgy, just numerous things that we can't replicate today. We don't know how to even go about it. Monolithic sculptures and things like that. We don't know how to do these things that the ancients did in ways that they would have theoretically had available to them.
Yeah, all it really takes is one genius to figure something out, and then in a generation or two, it's gone. Some
That's
other people just can't understand it.
well, and not only necessarily can't understand, but some of it they won't understand too, right? Some of it may go against the establishment at whatever time, and we even see that today. But some of it not to the degree that we did in past times, but some of it is so against the grain that you find a lot of cases of some of it being considered heresy, right?
Absolutely.
And there was a lot that I think we may never even recover as a result of things either being destroyed for being deemed heretical or being encoded so heavily that we can't really crack that code now. And these people were just, they were brave individuals, but they had a very valid fear of being prosecuted for heresy in these times by the church. And there are things now that the church has set back on some and said, we probably shouldn't have prosecuted Galileo for heresy because, the Pope was friends with him and he did kind of agree, but he couldn't take that stance. So there's a lot of things now that they've had to kind of walk back on and say, oh, maybe that wasn't the best approach to take, but that was the thing for the time.
I mean, hindsight is 2020. It's easy to recognize where we were wrong in the past, but that's why I think that it's so important that as individuals, we just be mindful of our behavior and keep an open mind and recognize the things that may seem impossible just aren't. It's just not within our realm of understanding.
Amen to that. But another figure from the speaking of heresy, another figure from the Library of Alexander, Hypatia, the the female philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician, was actually deemed to be a heretic in 415 AD and was attacked and murdered by an angry mob of Christians for her pursuit of knowledge at the Library of Alexandria. And that's something today that it would seem unfathomable to modern day people. There's a lot of hotly debated religious things in the world today, but that is not one that you typically would hear. There are, of course, in small pockets of the world, and even in our country, things that are religiously motivated, or I would say put off on religion more so than anything else. That are abhorrent acts, but not in the scale that you used to see in those times, because religion was something that was it was a much more black and white thing back then than it is now, and gray seems to be much more the shade that things operate in these days. And back then, things were very, very black and white. If it goes against the church's teachings, it's heretical. But it's up for debate nowadays. I think mostly things are up for debate now, and there's a lot more reason in how we handle things that go against the teachings of others now. In most cases, now I will say, while the church has improved, I think academia has actually gotten worse about that. I think academia has replaced the church as the new hypocrite almost in that sense. And I think that's why we have rise to things like podcasts so much now, is because people on podcasts are not necessarily restrained to the constraints of what the ancient church would have had or what modern academia has. And this is something that we're just doing. This is not this is not our profession. We're not historians. We're people who are fascinated with history and want to share this dialogue with others. This is not something I went to 6 years of college for. This is just something that we know some things about. We've researched some other things about, and we're discussing. It's an open dialogue about it, really. And I think that approach, that we're not staking our reputations on this. It's just we're having a conversation about it, and we're bringing up things that we've learned about or we know about, and ideas that we have about it, and it's a platform really that people can listen or not listen, they can discuss or not discuss, and they can learn or not learn from it. But it's all open. It's all very, very open. Whereas I think a lot of systems are not open. A lot of systems are closed, and that's why you had people getting prosecuted for heresy in ancient and in even more modern times than ancient times, is because it was not open. Things were not up for debate, and like I said, everything was very black and white in those times. So there were, and it's funny too because there was a lot of gray, but the gray was for the ruling class. The gray was not for the common man. And I think everybody gets to take part in that gray now. I think that's a beautiful thing. There are many ugly things in modern society, but I think that is not one of them. I think that is a thing of beauty.
Yeah, my thoughts on what you just said, which I mean, it's not going to be as elegant as the way you put it, but I feel like our species has just been inundated with information, things that we've gathered over the years through science and investigation. Um, in order for the church to keep its foot in the door, it kind of has to allow for a little wiggle room, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I would absolutely agree. They have to at the very least, and this is my take on it. I don't know the church's take on this or not. I'm not a Catholic. I did not grow up in that. I grew up in Protestant faith, so I'm familiar with a lot of their practices, but I'm not as much as somebody who would be like, say, a Catholic priest or someone would be. So that would be the person to really qualify this. But I think it's a situation where they have to at least appear more progressive. I don't know that that's their internal stance or not, but I think externally the optics of it is I think, and that goes for everyone. I think nowadays for the most part you do have echo chambers in some parts of the society with different things and different issues, but I think for the most part that's where society is leaning, that we have to appear more open minded. Otherwise, it's not appearing open-minded now is kind of the equivalent to not wanting to be heretical back then in some ways, because we're not necessarily going to be literally executed for it, but we might be canceled. We might lose our job, we might lose friends. It impacts us on social media. We have all these various new ways that things can affect us, and I think there are a lot more ways that things can affect us and impact us now for what we say and what we do. So there actually is a higher level of accountability in some sense with that, but also in others there's a higher level of anonymity behind keyboards and social media and things like that too. So I'm not really sure what that leans in favor of in that. I think that's something that history is really going to have to decide. That's not something that we really have sufficient data on yet, I think. I think we know that we're greatly impacted by these things, but the extent is yet to be discovered, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, our brains still haven't adjusted to the switch from hunter-gatherer to farmer, let
No,
alone
no, absolutely not.
let alone to borderline cyborg.
Right. And that's a very very interesting point. The and I want to say I want to say it was Elon Musk who I first heard make that comparison, and it may not be. Someone feel free to correct me if I have the wrong person and you know who it was, but I want to say I was listening to Elon talk one time about it, and he pointed out, the person who was speaking pointed out that when we all walk around with these smartphones in our pockets that are more powerful than the computers that were the size of a whole room in the 1950s.
Yeah,
that
the
we have
technology.
access to the sum total of the information in existence as far as we know, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. That's
With with
basically what
the
the
with
internet
the
is.
exception of very, very few things, there are very few places that we don't have access to. You have probably some information that we don't have access in the U.S. government. You have classified documents. You have different things that they may or may not confirm exist. And then you have places like the library at the Vatican, where you have some parts that are accessible to the public and some parts that are secret, and then some parts that probably only the Pope and the most highest ranking cardinals can get into. And there's for the most part, though, we have access to the sum total of information in the world at our fingertips, and that that augments our ability to converse, our ability to recall, our ability to check ourselves on things, and the way we communicate and the way we transfer these ideas and have that conversation, because that of course has changed because we're doing things like podcasts. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, things like these where we can communicate on. And that, like we said before, kind of going back to that, that's our version of something like being taught by Greek philosophers out in the public, or going and meeting with other people from across the world in one place and sharing ideas and working on multiple different disciplines together. And it allows us the ability to do things like this. And really those things are the philosophies behind those ancient practices are really what kind of paved the way for this type of thought, whether we realize it or not. When the people who created the internet, that might not have been exactly what they had in mind for it, but at the same time, a lot of that stuff is imprinted into our DNA by that point. You're talking about not having evolved into past hunter gatherers in certain aspects, and I absolutely agree that we haven't in certain aspects. We absolutely have not, and I think to that note, to that point, a lot of the anxiety that people suffer nowadays is from things exactly like that. That we we have adapted to be a certain way, and we're living in a way that, in some regards, is contrary to that. Because we're stationary, we're very reliant on technology and logistical things that did not exist in our inception. And those things may not be completely ingrained in us yet, especially technology. The technology that we have today, we are absolutely 100% not adapted to yet, because it's happening so rapidly, and we have not had the generations and generations and generations of adaptation needed for that to be something that's just inherent to us. But with that said, I can absolutely attest to the fact that I've seen children who are far better at technology than me, and I have years and years more experience with it than they do, but they just know it. They learn it from a very, very young age, and they just know it.
Now, do you think that, because like we were saying, evolution takes place over millions of years. It's not
Mhm.
something that's going to happen over 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 50,000 years. Takes millions. Takes a real long time. Um, now,
Evolution, or adaptation? Just you're talking
no,
evolution.
you can adapt. I mean, things change slightly,
Sure, but you're talking
like
about evolution
physically, but
on a
I'm talking
grander
about
scale.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So, do you think that human evolution towards the future, do you think that we're going to more rapidly um, change into something different? Do you think there's going to be some sort of technological crutch that will bring us to the next stage, like something like Elon Musk's neural mesh? Or do you think that we're just going to be replaced with
So
something that we created, like an artificial intelligence, something that's actually alive or close enough to being alive?
That's a tricky question. I think I think it depends on the chronological order of events that come from this point forward. I think it depends on the because another thing that could physically change is the space travel as well, right? Because we can
Yes.
adapt to that in different ways. And really, we're just talking about two different facets of what Elon does at that point, because we're talking about one thing he wants to do and another thing that he wants to do.
Yeah, that man, he scrambles my brain, man. Cannot relate.
Well,
He's not human.
he's very on topic for this. I mean, he's somebody who would have fit right in at the Library of Alexandria. He would have been one of those guys, you know. He would have been not even just one of those guys, one of those people, because I mean, Hypatia, female, you know, it was not limited to just men, and I think that's probably a misconception a lot of people would have too. And honestly, it's something that it never really occurred greatly to me that there would have been female scholars. I just hadn't thought about it because it's not as represented. But in ancient times, throughout different periods, depending on what empire you're in, what period you're in, there absolutely were. And sometimes you'll even find a greater concentration in some areas where you wouldn't expect it. Females taking the lead in certain things. But absolutely, I think he would have fit right in a situation like that. And as far as your initial point, uh, I think that is quite. I haven't pondered it much, but I think it is quite possible that we will see physical change as a result. Yes, and especially in regards to Neuralink and things like that. And I would have ventured to guess that there are a lot of people other than Elon who are at least interested in it, if not already working on it. Um, I won't speculate as to who I think may or may not be involved in it, but I think there are companies out there who are working on it, and there are probably people who are less vocal that are looking into it and working on it as well, or at least not as public. I think a lot of stuff is being done with that. I think a lot of stuff is being looked into as space travel, looking into getting us to Mars as a society, getting something established there. And I think there's a lot that could potentially impact what we look like in the future and how we interact in the future going forward from this stage we're at now, which is already to us so advanced. Because this is, I mean, we're in the future right now compared to when we were children. This is the Jetsons time. This is the Blade Runner time. This is the future. It's the present, but it's, you know, air quotes, it's the future. And we're seeing the ramifications of what we thought back then and what people actually brought to fruition now. And we're seeing things like the widespread adoption of the internet, everyone getting smartphones, electric vehicles that can drive themselves. We're talking about going to Mars. We're talking about the somewhat frightening idea of Neuralink and things like that. Um, Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all of these just astounding concepts, and they're it's really it's mind-boggling to think about all of this.
Yeah, we're definitely in the strangest time. I mean, maybe it just seems so strange to us because we're living in it. I'm sure steam engines would have seemed strange at the time, and farming,
I
first
think
farmers, that would have
I
seemed
think they all
strange.
seem fairly strange.
Mm.
I don't think that's a new I don't think that's a new occurrence. I don't think that's something that's ours. I don't think we own that. I think there's always a sense of strangeness about the world. I think there's always a sense that it's more limited than it's been in the past and it's stranger than it's been in the past. And I think that's just something that increases. Now, the way that probably decreases is with something like space travel, right? Because that actually broadens physical horizons at that point, where we can travel to different places that we haven't before. Because that's one thing that we've mostly covered in the world. We have areas that are deep in the jungles and the Amazon and places like that. They're just so hard to get to and so
Completely
remote
unmapped.
that
Yes.
and underneath the ocean, right? Those are the main places that we really just haven't completely been. But even with those things, they're making great strides in those areas. So
Yeah, I mean, people, you always hear people say that we know more about space than we do about our own oceans. But I would say that the ocean is rather limited, whereas space, we have how
space,
how many how many
space, it can be
how many
infinite.
so how
It can
many
be infinite.
solar systems in our galaxy alone, and then how many galaxies in the entire universe?
And
I mean,
that's not even getting into to quantum and string theory and things like that because that opens a whole other jar of worms, right?
oh yeah, that one. Yeah, the quantum world is pretty mind blowing because it just tells us that the world that we live in isn't the world that we live in. You know what I'm saying?
I do and I don't. And I think that's kind of the fascinating thing about it. I think that's a position that we're kind of all in. We're all kind of straddling that right now, so to speak. And
Yeah.
I think something else that's interesting too is that I don't know if you're aware, but there are places that have the entire internet backed up. Or at least one. I don't know if it's multiple locations, but I've heard of at least one location that has the entire internet saved.
Really?
I may be incorrect about that, but I believe I've read that there's somewhere that they actually have just a bank of computers and the sole purpose of them is just to back up the internet.
Interesting.
And that reminds me of Alexandria because in Alexandria, the way they got a lot of the knowledge and the books that they had there is every single ship that passed through the port. There was a law that the books had to be translated and copied and what have you before the ships could leave port. Every bit of knowledge, unless it was smuggled through in some way where they couldn't find it, was copied into the Library of Alexandria. So it was essentially the precursor to that scenario. Once again, everything I won't say everything is cyclical, but everything very much seems to be cyclical. These things repeat themselves and manifest in different ways, but there seem to be clear cycles in them.
I would agree. Interesting how that works.
And I mean that's a even if they
Maybe it's just a compulsion of the human mind to
how
do the
so?
things that we do. Um, the idea of to preserve knowledge and collect it and understand everything.
Do
That's,
you do you think that's a function of the ego or something else?
I mean, the way I understand it, our ego is basically there to keep us alive. Tell us when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, that our legs are broken, not to drive us to figure out what's going on around us. I
But
mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
to want to know everything though could be an egotistical viewpoint, no?
Yeah, but I can't understand. I mean, I, don't- I'm not the guy to talk to about psychology or even philosophy, but I just can't find the biological comparative that would drive us
The survival
to want
mechanism.
to
There's no
want to
survival mechanism that you're drawing the conclusion to, right?
essentially, yeah, I don't see.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's not an evolutionary trait necessarily. It could be, but it might be one we don't understand.
that's true.
Because
That is
I
true.
think it really it could be a survival mechanism. The more we know, the better we can survive.
Yeah, the more we're able to understand our environment,
It
better.
may be a subconscious survival mechanism.
That's true.
It might not be egotistical at all. It might not be rooted in the ego. It could just be a subconscious survival mechanism that the more knowledge that we gather, the safer we are. The more we know about a situation, I mean, that's just gaining intel on something.
You're right. That is it's absolutely correct. I
And
wouldn't have explained
that
it
would
that
make
way or thought about it that way.
that would make a lot of sense with Alexander's mission to hoard knowledge in that way, because he was a conqueror and a young conqueror at that. He was very much probably always in survival mode. And not only that, but he had to look somewhat graceful in doing it because he had to lead while he did it. He had to lead from the battlefield while he did it. And sometimes against objection. I think probably almost more times than not from what I've read. He certainly met a lot of objection in India. He certainly met objection towards his end in Persia. Uh, there were numerous times he wanted to build a causeway when it was not really a viable proposition to go attack a city, and he sent people to do peace talks twice, I believe. And I think the first time he sent people to do peace talks and didn't really work out. And I believe they had the people killed. I think they threw him into the water. And the second time he offered to give a sacrifice to the god of the people, and the people didn't like the optics on it, and they refused, and they said essentially that that would make him their ruler. And he lucked out that he needed a navy at the time, and he lucked out that the Persian navy that he had just conquered the people who were in charge of while they were at sea still returned, and so he commandeered his newly acquired navy and was able to take the city he was trying to get into. And the whole time until they began killing his emissaries, the people he was with were his troops were against it. They didn't want to invade the city because they thought it was a bad idea, and they wanted to do it peaceably. And when the emissaries got killed, that was all out the window.
Sounds like a rough world to live in.
Well, we're there, man. We're just there at a different time. It all I think it always has been, and it,
I mean, I'm not there.
unfortunately may always be.
I've got four walls around me. I got a roof. I got food in my refrigerator. I got a
Well,
plastic bottle full of water sitting next to me. I'm pretty comfortable.
when I say we, I mean the world is still the world, right? Not me and you necessarily so much, but everyone. There are definitely people who are in rough places, rough scenarios, and that hasn't changed. It's just where and how and who.
That's true. But I mean, as a whole, we're pretty comfortable today.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. I think there are a lot of things that we have now that previous generations and especially previous civilizations have lacked in. There objectively are a lot of things that could be said for that for sure. You know, we have mostly clean water in the world, or at least in the what you would say, like, I guess the first and second world mostly has clean water. Most people tend to have shelter. Most people tend to have food. These are not global issues on a widespread scale, but
Not yet.
they're issues that affect. Well, yeah, there's concern about that for sure with the growing population and things like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
But
another thing that you forgot to mention, our advancements in medicine,
yes,
pretty incredible. I mean, I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast from a few days ago. A gentleman named Aubrey de Grey. He's a genetic scientist working on expanding the lifespans of human beings to up to 500 years. And this gentleman seems to think that he can accomplish this within our lifetimes.
There's a lot of talk of that. My own father's actually brought up stuff like that. He always jokes that he's going to live to be 150, and it might not be a joke. We don't know. It might
Yeah, I
not
mean,
be a
because
joke.
apparently the aging process is just decay of the cells, and if they can reverse that, then there's nothing really stopping us from living forever, except maybe an asteroid.
I think it's hard to say, honestly, what can or can't stop us from living forever and what kind of problems that we may run into with that. I think a lot of it is very, very speculative still, and
Oh
it's kind
yeah.
of yet to be determined.
I mean,
But
I'm not a geneticist. I don't really claim to understand that in any real way, but I'm just saying from this guy's take, who seems to know quite a bit about it, he seems to be pretty confident.
oh, for sure. And I think there's a lot to be said for it. If nothing else, I think it's a great thing to be looking into, right?
Oh yeah.
Something we didn't get into yet that I wanted to discuss is what actually happened with the Library of Alexandria. That so we know that the story goes at least when Caesar came to Alexandria and Caesar came, he burned the ships in the harbor, right? This is a story at least. And I think there's a common misconception that that actually burned down the sum total of all of this knowledge in the Library of Alexandria. That seems to actually not be the case the further we get along and the more we find out about it. That there were still people attending this library for maybe as much as centuries past that point into what would be the Roman Empire at that point from the Greco-Roman or the Greek Empire before. And there were still people coming there for a long time after, and it seems that it's quite possible these documents may have disappeared over time, and we don't know exactly where these documents wound up, but it doesn't seem that they were consumed by the fire, and the fire didn't even seem to burn the whole library. It seems that the library probably fell into disrepair over time or something of that nature, more so than than it being destroyed in one fell swoop like that. And I remember when I first learned about the Library of Alexandria, I learned that it just completely was torched, basically. That was how I heard the story. But upon doing more research and the more I hear about it from different sources now, it seems that's probably not the case. And that a lot of these documents and books and parchments and things quite possibly made it to other places. So some of this information could still be out there, and some of it, like I would say, some of it likely is maybe not necessarily in places that we could find it or places we could access, perhaps, but some of it could be in black market antiquity sales and things like that. We wouldn't even know. I mean, you could have scenarios like how the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right? Where they weren't expecting to find that, and somebody just happened to have them and found out, and somebody else realized what they were and got a hold of them, and that started that whole thing.
I
But
believe the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were found in a cave. It was
in
just a
Egypt, right?
cache of scrolls.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, that's exactly what it was. They were just
Perhaps
look
Egypt.
they were just located.
There's a kid just throwing rocks into a cave, and then he heard some clay shatter, and
I think
that's
yeah, I think
it.
that's what I've heard as well. Yeah, and that's just fascinating, because there's a lot of implications behind those as well. That's for another time, but yeah, it's just it's wild to think about that. There's possibly information from the Library of Alexandria still floating around today somewhere, and whether it be in the hands of black market antique dealers, private collectors, uh, in some cave in Egypt, waiting for some kid to throw the right rock at it,
Right.
locked away in some secret library somewhere. It's really hard to say.
Buried somewhere. Anything,
Absolutely,
man.
absolutely. It could be under a sea somewhere for all we know. It's very hard to say, and I think some of it could have survived, and we might not know that that was the origin of it, right? Because a lot of these were just copies of other documents from other places, so they
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily, what is intact of them still might not necessarily bear any markings of their being from Alexandria. it could just appear to be translations of other documents at this point. So these things could be out there in the wild right now, and we wouldn't even know necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on that, people would just assume that we're gonna find some huge cache labeled, you know, remnants from the Library of Alexandria. But like you're saying, that's not necessarily the case. They're just books. They could be anywhere.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's why we don't really have any definitive answer on it now. It's just it still unfortunately remains a bit of a mystery, but it's something that at least we can have the conversation about, shed a little light into, and talk about it because I think it's a very important topic. And as I think we found out in this conversation, it holds a lot of relevance in what's going on today still.
I mean, it's important. That's our history, man.
Absolutely.
Foundations of the modern world.
Absolutely. And I mean that's what gave way to all the things that all the great schools that we have now that we were discussing earlier. They're all rooted in things like that in the Forum and other ancient schools that were these different format but still evolved into what we have now. And
Even if now
podcasts and
it's
things like
not.
that as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, universities today have kind of stagnated into something more like a ancient church where people want to burn you alive for being heretical. I mean, not physically, but
Well, some of them might. You don't know.
some of them might. But it's I'm pretty sure it's more along the lines of just
No, of
social
course,
destruction
of
now.
course.
People would rather
No, not you get
incite
you
you
get you get
suicide.
canceled now, right? You get
Yeah.
canceled, or your career falls by the wayside. You become a fringe person in your field. You might not be as
Oh,
respected. You might not get certain jobs you want, grants you want, etc. And so there's a lot of risk in it for academics now, and the people who do kind of speak outside of the lines or do become labeled fringe sometimes and have to kind of find their own paths to really convey their message still and that's sad, honestly, but it's the way things are, and the only thing we can really do is exchange ideas freely in the only ways that we know how. And so we have these various outlets like this that we can talk about things still freely and without much resistance. So at least there is that. We have that option, and we have the option to create content on our own and not be as constrained as we were even a decade ago, even especially 2 decades ago, we wouldn't have had the ability to do these types of things. So I find that to be a very valuable tool for society and something that maybe takes us more a step in the right direction, even if we have to get there from 2 steps back.
agreed.
But all right, Ryan, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up for here. I think that was a great conversation and I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
You too, sir. Well, all right, everybody. This has been Wisdom of the Immortals, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. If you enjoyed this content, please like, follow, and subscribe for more Wisdom of the Immortals.